Cool. It's showing that it's going live on YouTube as well. So just takes a second to load up. This is my first time. So for people tuning in, this is my first time going live on two separate platforms at the same time. I mean, we're getting super fancy here. Oh, there we go. All right. I was getting feedback from it. All right. So yeah, so it looks like it's live on both platforms. Let me just share it into the group real quick too. And if you're not a member of the Living Off Rentals Facebook group, now is a great time to jump over there and join. It's a great community, and you can get any rental questions answered that you've got. Living Rentals, perfect. All right, cool. Samir, welcome to Living Off Rentals.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to have you here today. So lending is a topic that I've been asked about a lot lately. So I've actually asked a few different subject matter experts on lending to come on this show and talk about different products that are available and different niche type of loans that investors might not even know exist, because you hear about the conventional products all the time, but it feels very mysterious once you get into the investor type products. So, and I know there's some that you'll even go up to 100% financing on, which, people are like, no, that doesn't exist. No lender's ever going to lend 100%. So I want to talk about some of that today on this podcast, particularly too, because I know you work primarily with military investors, and a lot of my audience is military veterans or military affiliated in some way. So they could be perfect type of borrowers for your business. But just to give a little bit of context for the listeners, so Samir runs Trophy Point, which is a private lender that exclusively funds military affiliated borrowers trying to build a rental portfolio and flip houses. His firm has lent out $47 million in the past 24 months, and they are unique that they lend up to 100% LTC, which is loan to cost. Samir served on active duty and is still in the Army Reserves. He bought his first hotel while still at West Point, basically a college student buying a hotel, and has steadily been adding to his holdings ever since. He owns numerous properties, all different kinds, single family, multifamily, and hospitality, self-storage. He teaches real estate entrepreneurship at Georgia State University part-time. He holds an MBA from Emory and a master's in commercial real estate from Georgia State. So very highly qualified person to be talking about lending today. So I really appreciate you being here. If you can kind of just start off by providing a little more detail on your background and how you decided to get into first real estate investing in general, and then ultimately into the lending side of things.
Thanks, Kirby. And before I get started, I want to say thank you actually for what you do for the community. What you started at Bunker Labs and now what you're doing with Living Off Rentals. Like my journey has benefited immensely from people like you that share their time and expertise in the form of podcasts and writing and things like that. And so I would not say I'm a self-made person, even though I have, I think, a lot to my name at this point. I'm definitely not a self-made person because I've basically stood on the shoulders of people like you that, took the effort. And it's a lot of effort to put together a podcast. It's a lot of effort to put out content. So I appreciate it because that's exactly how I sort of got started to learn by osmosis as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
But so I think your original question was, how did I get into lending or how did I get into real estate?
Yeah. How does somebody go from being a college student at a military academy and buying a hotel simultaneously to getting into becoming more of a professional real estate investor and lender?
So I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been, for the majority of my career, I've been a borrower, actually, if you think about it. Mm-hmm. And then a few years ago, I had some success. I started selling off some assets. And I've always been lending to people in many capacities, mostly friends that would come up to me and say, hey, I need 100,000, 200,000 for the deal. I need to move quickly. We're closing next week, or we need to close next week. And usually I would just lend on a handshake. And I've sort of been doing that the past few years, several years. And I think the requests have started becoming more and more frequent. And so I decided that I only want to lend, we only want to generally lend to people we know inside our circle, which is somebody that's worn the uniform, that comes from, the Army and the same values, the military values that we all kind of have of getting it done, problem solving, no excuses, like we operate with deadlines. We can speak in a very direct manner. We're not trying to beat around the bush. Like those sorts of qualities I really appreciated. And I guess since the requests became more and more frequent, I thought, why don't we just slap a brand on it, call it Trophy Point, and actually help other veterans just like us that we could be the lender that we wish we had when we were trying to be up and coming as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a great way for any business to start. You organically just start doing something, filling a need that's there. And then, it turns into a side hustle, and then it starts to grow from there. And I think those are the best businesses. People that kind of just come up with the product they want to sell, and think there's going to be demand for. Those are the ones I think that struggle a lot more. So that's awesome. Well, a lot of people who listen to this, I think what I've heard them say is, they want to build a rental portfolio. And obviously, as the name implies there, but they say, I've got enough maybe savings for one down payment. So how am I gonna grow beyond that? It doesn't seem feasible to them to continue to grow. So can you talk about like the financing options that are available today, and kind of what you do at Trophy Point?
Yeah, so to use your analogy or example, you may have somebody that saves up, let's say $25,000, $50,000, and that's good enough for a down payment. Especially for the rental properties that I would espouse trying to get into. I would not recommend buying like a $400,000 house to turn that into a rental. I think houses 250 and below are very doable as rental properties, and that's also market dependent, but I think you get the idea. And so you have that option. Many lenders lend up to 90% of the purchase price for a rental portfolio. And that's great. And if you just want to get one or two rental properties under your portfolio, then that's fantastic. Use your savings for that, because you'll get the best rates. Probably if you could put 20% down, that's even better. You'll make your lender very happy. But for those of us that want to add 5, 10, 15 units to our portfolios, and there's some really good reasons for that. Literally, you could live off your rentals, as your podcast actually is so aptly titled. For those folks, your available or saved cash can only take you so far. And so then you have to start being creative with the financing. And there's a couple of different ways you can hack it. Like one, you could always try to get seller financing if you can, right? Where you don't have to put that much money down, and your seller is in essence funding basically or financing your acquisition. And that's probably the best way. And I would always say start there if you can, but 9 times out of 10, most sellers probably won't go for that. They want to get their cash up front and they want to walk away. So then you've got the banks, and then you've got private lenders. And the banks typically, I would say they don't like to lend. It's really weird to say, because banks, the way they're structured after 2009, 2010, with some of the laws in place, the way they lend doesn't exactly, like, quote unquote, no pun intended, lend itself to good rental portfolio operators, because they want money down with every single deal. The underwriting process can be very arduous. And so you may even lose deals because the bank has such documentation requirements, and your seller may want to close in 10 days. And honestly, if you're trying to acquire a lot of properties, through experience, or you will find out through experience, that sellers want a quick close. They don't like financing contingencies. They don't like, waiting 30 days, even 45 days for things like that. And if you can be the guy that says, or the person that says, hey, I'll close all cash in 10 days or 15 days and less. I don't even need an appraisal contingency. No financing contingency. You're more likely to win that offer. You may even be less in terms of your bid by a couple $1,000, but I think most sellers will go for your bet, because it's more, there's less things that can go wrong. And so then, that leads itself to private lenders like us, where, most private lenders want 10% down still. But for the military affiliated crowd, I'll lend up to 100% LTV or 100% LTC as long as there's some built-in equity into the property upon the buy.
Yeah. So how do you determine that?
So, that's the art. There's a science to it, which everybody knows, which is comparables, but then the art is being able to like negotiate deals where you're buying below market. And there's many ways you can do that, but PropStream, for example, is a great tool where you can see the available comparables of properties in that neighborhood that sold within the last 6 months. That's what we use also partially in our analysis, is like, what's the comp? So if the houses in the neighborhood sell for 200 and you're picking it up because of your skill in negotiation and the strength of your offer for 165, for example, I'll lend you the 165 100%, on that. You just got to make sure that you're getting a good deal, and typically you want to find off-market deals in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody's doing the BRRRR model and they bring the deal to you, so you're doing your own underwrite. You're not sending an appraiser out to the property to do an appraisal. You're basically pulling your own comps. And they say, yeah, I think, I'm putting an offer at 165. I think it's worth 200 today. It'll be worth 300 when I'm done. I'm going to put $50,000 into it. You verify that yourself.
Yeah, we listen very closely. I think the benefit of working with a private lender, especially one that has owned properties, is that we're pretty flexible. Like, I think, and a good private lender, it's not just about me, but a good private lender should have experience in real estate, one, but two, they should be very, very like available in terms of listening to your plan in particular. Whereas banks kind of have like a cookie cutter approach, and they just want to, the lending officer probably never even owned real estate to begin with. And so they don't maybe not be able to see what you're trying to accomplish in terms of value creation. But if you find a private lender that has owned real estate, knows what real estate is, and is willing to listen, and they should listen, then you're going to get a lot further along in getting a deal done. And so we don't order appraisals. We order like a modified one because I need to for investor purposes, like a third party sort of like broker price opinion, if you want to call it that. But if I have to order an appraisal, then that's going to mean time and cost, like a lot of cost. Like it could be 3 weeks, 4 weeks before you get your appraisal done, potentially. If you thought the appraisal was going to cost $600, it may end up costing $1,200 because of supply and demand. And there's not that many appraisers out there, depending on the market, of course. And it may have come down a little bit, especially in today's market as we talk. But generally, like, appraisals can really screw up the process. Whereas you just want to deal with somebody that agrees with your plan or can see the merits of your plan, and empower you to go forward that way. I don't need to rely on an appraisal. As a good lender, I don't need to rely on an appraisal to look at a property when I can just use my own experience to kind of verify what we already know.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially when it's in that, unrehabbed condition. It's really tough for traditional appraisers to come in and slap a value on that. Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of turnaround time, then, like you mentioned, a lot of investors, they have a short turnaround time between the time they get it under contract and the time they need to close. So how long do you typically need to get a deal done?
So I'll say this: the shortest we've done a deal is 12 hours, where somebody's lender pulled out at the last minute and they had title done and the paperwork was done. We really just had to change names a little bit, Control F, replace, and change some things around, but we got the deal done in 12 hours. Typically, we can close a deal within 10 days or less. It's really like title is the only general problem that we encounter, and that's kind of out of my control. But as long as title search is done and the documents don't take that long, we have lawyers that work pretty fast on our side that can do docs the same day, generally speaking. We can fund within 5 to 10 days. And I think that's, private lenders, you do pay more for sure in terms of interest cost and points and all that. But then they should be able to make it up in terms of speed and then the easiness to close. And that's where we specialize in, is speed and the ease of closing.
Yeah, man, that's about the fastest I've ever heard of. So that's impressive.
I think it matters. I think it's a competitive advantage because remember, you're
Absolutely.
competing with other guys to go take down properties, right? It's a very saturated market to find undervalued properties. And
Hmm.
so being able to close quickly, I think, is a competitive advantage in your offering to the seller in order to get them to agree to sell to you versus the other 4 or 5 offers they may have at any given
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a really interesting discussion because I just had Brandon Campbell on from Lima One Capital. So they're a larger sort of middle ground between private lenders and big banks. And a lot of people, so he kind of went through his standards, which are a bit different than yours, and the pros and cons. It's interesting to hear the pros and cons. You know, that there's no way they're going to close in 12 hours, and they're probably going to be, a little bit more stringent on requirements, and get require the appraisal and all that stuff. But I think it's good for people to hear kind of the juxtaposition between the different products that are out there, because you hear people make these blanket statements all the time. And it's a lot of it, like you're talking about, is relationship based. It's like you're getting comfortable with a borrower, and, understanding that you're on the same page with their analysis as well. And you can be a lot more agile. So again, pros and cons to working with different types of lenders, but this is definitely a niche that is a big need for investors, and can really fill a gap. So when it comes to that, though, you're looking at the property and you're looking at the person. Obviously, those two are going to make a big difference to a deal. I always tell people you can't turn a criminal into an honest person through paperwork. So I'd rather do a handshake deal any day of the week with somebody that's just a great person and ethical, than try to, have a 20-page long legal document that I think is going to just hold somebody to a higher standard that's just a dishonest person. So how do you evaluate the person, the investor, the borrower, and then what do you look at for the deal beyond just like the spread in it? Is there any other like red flags or anything you look for?
Yeah, so we typically like to deal with military affiliated people, like where they come from. That matters a lot. Active duty military, one of the reasons why we're so responsive and fast and easy to use is because I get it, like active duty military, they've got a day job and they've got stuff going on during the day. They don't have time to like have a bunch of check boxes that they have to tick off, trying to get a deal done. So I think for us, like we look at where they come from. Do they have income from other sources, such as a day job or a military government job? And do they have the net worth? Do they show experience in real estate? Do they have net worth? Things like that. And honestly, like a prepared borrower that has sort of that stuff already in place, and it's not that hard to create. Like it's just spreadsheets and stuff like that. And we do some stuff technology-wise that can expedite the verification process. It doesn't take that long for us to underwrite. My partner, Dave Merrill, he's our chief underwriter, and he's actually my classmate too.
Mm.
Dave can underwrite within hours on a property. Many times people say, hey, I've got a deal. I want to put an offer in today. Can you give me an indication if you want to do this deal? And we may not do the full underwriting in that, the same day, but looking at the borrower, knowing where they come from and looking at the asset, we can give them the clear pricing, sort of indicative terms on pricing, and if we want to do the deal the same day. So then they have the confidence to go put in their offer if they need to move fast. But generally, like we take a pretty common sense approach. Like if the person has experience, we feel like they know what they're doing, we know that they're good for it, quote unquote, with the money coming in the door from all their sources, then we're more likely to do the deal. And that's no way to run a bank for sure. But thankfully, I'm not a bank. I'm just a guy with some capital that my investors are trusting us with, and that's why we kind of stick to the military affiliated crowd, because generally the propensity of fraud and things like that are less with those types of people. And honestly, if you think about it, the military does the vetting for you in many ways, because if the guy has a security clearance, you'll probably already know that they don't have a criminal record, or there are not many bankruptcies or anything like that on their record.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
should
There's not
probably ask
many.
for OERs. That might help even more.
Yeah. They're the top 1% of the 1% is what they say in those, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, that like there's not a lot of people in our network that are going to, screw people over and then still be around in the network very long. It's pretty small. The military affiliated community is pretty small, and so your reputation it means a lot. So I think that's a great, from a lending standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to kind of niche down to that community. You mentioned that what with the loan offering that you have, it can be a little bit more expensive, but you've got the trade-offs of agility and the personal relationship more so than like a bank would. So what are your rates if somebody is looking to borrow, or what's your typical terms?
Yeah. So typically we charge 10 point, right now, we had to go up because the rates have gone up, but we were at 9.9. Now we're at 10.75% interest only monthly payments. And then we typically charge anywhere from 2 to 4 points. And that really depends on how much money you want to put in. Like if you want all 100% and you don't really put in much cash in the deal, then we'll lend 10.75 and 4 points typically.
Hmm,
But if you have money to put in, then we come down dramatically on the points as well. In many
got it.
ways, I found out that we're actually somewhat cheaper than a lot of private lenders out there, in some respects. And then we don't charge we do charge a documentation fee and appraisal fee, but really like we don't make any profit on that. That's actual hard costs, which we try to keep to a minimum in order to get the deal done as part of closing costs. But we you pay those providers at closing. You don't pay us even for that. So we keep it pretty
Yeah,
simple, just interest and points, and then whatever the
got
service
it.
charge for fees.
Okay. And what's the length on this? Is it 6 months, or what do you typically do?
We're flexible. I think like you tell us what your plan is, and if your plan really means that you need 9 months, then 9 months it'll be. If it's like something that we typically like to do 6 to 9 months for the most part, we really
Mhm.
don't do anything more than 12 months, but we have extension options built in. And that's something you should always negotiate ahead of time with any lender that you talk to, especially in real estate, especially if you have a rehab plan that involves some form of construction or you're at risk of supply chain issues. You
Yeah.
definitely, want to talk about your extension options ahead of time and build that into the loan. And so what we do in particular is we have two 3-month extension options generally built into the loan, or at least 2 1-month extension options built into every loan. So
Got it.
we just do that as standard, but you should always ask as a matter of due diligence.
Yeah. Yeah. And for people in this audience too, who are listening to this, who might have, just listened to the Brandon Campbell interview, he was talking about DSCR loans. And so I just want to clarify the difference here, because people might be hearing this going, man, that's really expensive capital. This isn't like a 30-year term fixed rate loan. This is a temporary loan. These are designed to be either a fix and flip or the BRRRR model, which is really popular in this community, where you buy something, like you said, off market. Typically it's below market value based on some hair on the deal. Typically there's, it's a squatter house or a hoarder house, or, it's just in bad disrepair or whatever. And you're going to fix that up and turn it around. So you're getting it under market value, and you're rehabbing it and then refinancing it into a longer term loan. So it's not designed, it is more expensive than you're used to on the longer term stuff, but it's designed to be temporary money. And so if somebody then wants to refinance it into a long-term loan, do you guys do that, or how do you work those types of loans?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of partners lending, like Hiavi, Lima One. Actually, they're actually partners of ours on the 30-year side. Like we developed what's called an all-in-one sort of product where you just fill out one application, and then we get you we help you acquire the home quickly. You get rental seasoning under it, and then we'll actually fill out the applications for you to shop the loan for you without even a hard credit check in many cases, and then offer you terms on like what our bank partners or private lending, or like not private lending, but the other bank partners out there can offer you on a 30-year or 15-year sort of term. And so we've helped like many borrowers up to this point acquire 4 or 5 houses a year with this sort of all-in-one sort of inclusive package. Now you don't have to go with us on the 30-year part, but we do that as like as an added bonus just to make it easier, because we also want to get paid back too. So we have some selfish reasons for it.
Yeah.
But this way we allow, just because we are a little bit more expensive, we allow ourselves to be a little bit more white glove and help out. And I think you should probably ask that question of every private lender, like how can you help on the back end? Because the exit in many ways is more important than the entry.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And for most people who are looking to get to a place of living off rentals, then this is super important. I mean, this is like a key component of it. So if you can streamline this process and just find the property up front, and 100% of the funds are going to be there for the rehab and purchase some rehab, and then it's such a good deal. And if you're lending 100% LTC, then most likely when it's done being rehabbed, it will be worth enough to where you can pull out capital at that point. You could pull out the 25% is going to be, just gravy on top for you. So, most long-term lenders want to see 25% equity in the property. And so, you can pull out that capital, you can pay back Samir, and then you get a payday on top of that, which is pretty incredible to do. So, that's amazing. And, I think it's well worth the cost if it's all streamlined and you can just focus fully on finding great deals and getting those turned around. So, that is great.
Yeah. And like, I said earlier, like I'm trying to be the lender I wish I had when I was doing this. Like when I was a first lieutenant over at Fort Lewis, and this is like the 2011, 2013 sort of time frame, I think I flipped and managed about 20 units. And I realized like early on that like I'm spending half my time on the financing when I really ought to be spending my time on finding good deals. Yeah. And so I want to be the lender. We want to be the lender that allows you to spend 95% of your time on finding good deals where you can create that 20, 35% extra equity through your value creation methodologies, whether you whether you get it on the buy or you do it through rehab or whatever. I think it's better for you to spend your time there. And then if you find a lender like myself, which is what we're trying to be, then you don't have to worry about lining up the financing every single time or try to go through 3 different lenders and all that sort of thing. You kind of have like the clear path and the clear certainty of where the money's going to come from, enabling you to go spend time on finding good deals.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And you personally, I think the benefit, another key benefit of working with someone like you is that you are an investor and a lender. So you understand both sides of it, which is rare. I mean, I think a lot of people think, well, yeah, of course, lenders are going to invest too. They see how good it is, but a lot of them just stick to their to the lending side of things, and they don't understand the investor's perspective, which I think is really important. So, can you kind of share how you have transitioned as an investor over the years as well? Like, what that first property, how'd you buy a hotel when you were at West Point? First off, how does a college kid buy a hotel? And then, how have the deals that you've done evolved, and what do you look for these days?
So I don't have many skills. Ask my wife, she'll test. I don't have many skills. But if there's one skill I have that has carried me over the last 15, 20 years of my adult life, which it has been like the ability to talk to people and ask questions. And so USAA, as you may be aware, USAA gives all Service Academy and ROTC students like a $30,000 loan, and maybe $37,000 now, but they give these college students that are in their commissioning programs $30,000 at a low interest rate, which you don't even have to pay back for at least 18 months until you actually commission, until you pin on your rank. So I just called a bunch of people, and I knew that I wanted to put it into a townhome, actually. Like my original plan was to get a rental property. Because I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I had read some of the other books. Like I was kind of already bought into that sort of mindset of building assets. Anyway, I just called a bunch of people, said, hey, I'm looking to buy a townhome. If you know anybody looking to sell, this is my criteria. And then after about a dozen 3, 4 dozen of those phone calls, someone's like, hey, this hotel's for sale. They didn't really know me. They were a friend of a friend of a friend. They didn't know me, but they're like, hey, this hotel's for sale. This couple's divorcing. The judge is kind of forcing them to liquidate it because their divorce has been going on for 5 years. And so I saw this opportunity and I thought from my vantage point, it was a really good deal. So then I started another dozen phone calls to find investors for it. And eventually I found an investor who would be willing to take me under his wing, who owned hotels, who co-guaranteed the loan with me and sponsored me through this process. And I think I won him over by, just my reputation, like my enthusiasm. It didn't hurt that I went to West Point, which is a very selective school. So like I kind of had some things going for me. But I was connecting the dots as I went along, right? And I'm a guy that'll jump from lily pad to lily pad, not even knowing where that next lily pad is. And I teach real estate here in Atlanta, and I noticed that a lot of people don't get started in building a rental portfolio, for example, because they're waiting for the stars to align. And I can tell you, and you know this, that the stars never fully align ever. And so you fall into this trap. If you are that person, you wait for the stars to align, but you never end up finding that perfect situation. It never happens. So you never even get started. And so the other skill I have is just diving in sometimes without looking. And, I've gotten burned. I've been nearly annihilated net worth wise a couple times. But I have confidence in knowing what I deserve in life. And I'm always going to move in that direction of what I think I deserve. Even if I know I don't have all the answers today, I have excellent resources like what you're putting together with living off rentals. At that time, there were a lot of resources and I was just willing to ask questions and be the guy that absorbs everything and just one lily pad at a time. And I did that with hotels and I did with other assets. When I was at Fort Lewis, I bought a debt collection company while I was a lieutenant, collecting on HOA debt. And I'd met the guy who ran that business in an elevator in my apartment building. And I'm just a guy that'll talk to anybody and I want to hear what they're doing. And he told me what he was doing and I really liked his business in terms of the economics of debt collection, at least back then. And so I took a controlling stake in the business. He stayed on and we ended up like finding a bunch of houses through that business. I had no intention of finding property through the debt collection business, but I just made the connection that if you owe debt, then you probably may want to sell your house. And, and I'm a nice debt collector, like we never yell or anything like that. And so just through being a good conversationalist, we were able to pick up a bunch of houses for people that wanted to just offload.
Wow. That's awesome. That's, it's non-traditional in terms of most people just think, well, it's, as a college kid, you couldn't buy a hotel, but it just speaks volumes to if you want something, you just figure it out. You just start, like you said, you got on the phone and started calling people. And the first person you talked to, wasn't the right person, but eventually you got to someone that said, yeah, sure. The numbers make sense. And, I trust you. And so, the deal worked out. So that's incredible. What were some of the, you mentioned that you got burned a couple times, and maybe learned some lessons. What are there any lessons that you took away from that you think are kind of rules to live by now, maybe?
Yeah. So one of them was someone stole, basically, I had a business partner and basically it was tantamount to theft. So I put a substantial amount of money into a deal and I actually structured it as a loan. It's one of the first loans I ever did, actually. But it was a handshake deal, which was a mistake as a lender, at least. And he never recorded he said he would record my sort of lien or at least put me on the title of the property at closing. And that never happened. And so essentially I became like this unsecured creditor / limited partner investor with no documentation, with no real claims to the property other than like a piece of paper that the guy signed and an email. And then he went out and took another loan on that same property. So technically I'm supposed to have the property has to have a loan or my lien on it, but that wasn't there. So what he did was he doubled up on it and doubled the leverage. And thankfully that property was really good. And I ended up having to take over. I sued him. It was really ugly. And I ended up getting most of my money back through the value creation. Like this property we bought it for like 250, and I ended up selling it for like 415. So I got
Nice.
I got all the other lenders' money back because he definitely recorded his lien. But after I paid off him, I got my, most of my 250 back as well. But at the time, like, I didn't have the money to pay off the other lender. And so the project was going down the tubes. And so I'm not a self-made man because my father actually, and the thing is, I actually borrowed the 250 from somebody else to put into that deal too. So there's actually 3 lenders involved in this one deal.
Yeah.
I borrowed from somebody, I lend it to this guy, then this guy gets money from another buddy, from somebody else on the same property. And so I
Yeah.
didn't have any money to pay the guy that I borrowed the money from because I was counting on it coming from the asset.
Right.
And so when I saw there's a major problem there, the loan was due with the guy I borrowed money from. And so to my father's credit, and I never would say I'm a self-made person because my dad just basically cashed out his retirement.
Wow.
And he was a corporate guy at IBM, and he had money, but not that much money to cash out for his son. And so I'm really eternally grateful that he cashed out his IRA, took the penalties a little bit, and helped me pay off my loan. And then I was able to pay my dad back 6 months, 7 months later when I finally unwound the deal legally and then sold off the property and all that.
Wow. Wow. So the lesson that learned from that is to ensure that they record your lien at closing.
Yeah, and if you're working with partners, like, take the extra time to document stuff.
Yeah.
Don't just get a partnership agreement or an operating agreement. Just don't get a template online and then just sign it and then be like, hey, that's it. Take an hour at least and talk about the dirty parts of the business. Like, if something goes wrong, who's going to make the final decision on what we do? If we have to put in, let's say, an extra $50,000, I'm just putting, let's say we have to make a capital call and it's $50,000. Where's that extra money?
Yeah.
Who's
Your mute's going a little crazy there.
Oh, no.
Seems to be flashing on and off.
How about now?
Yeah, should be good.
Like, take the time to actually talk through that stuff with regard to the dirty parts of the partnership and put it on paper, put it in an operating agreement, and be very clear about it. And in many ways, I would say, like, use that opportunity to, like, get your partners to start saying no, meaning, like, push them a little bit and, like, get really ugly with the scenarios so that they themselves understand what could potentially happen. And I failed to do that in my first deal or first few deals, thinking that trust was all we needed to get going. And it's really not the case, I believe, especially for newer folks and beginners. You really want to spend a lot more time on the operating agreement, or at least have a agreement signed on committed to paper.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Awesome. Yeah, I do lending as well on a pretty small scale, in terms of just lending out my self-directed IRA funds or other capital that I have access to. And it can be a really great business model. It can be lucrative and it can work really well. And I love how you just grew yours organically. That's where you started as well. What's the long-term vision for Trophy Point?
Ultimately, so I have 2 partners as well, Dave Merrill and Nick Cosmas. They're my West Point classmates, actually.
Nice.
And it's great because I know where they come from. We have the same values. We basically grew up together. They probably grew up faster than I did, maturity-wise, but I'm grateful to have them on the team. But essentially what we want to do is we want to just do more lending, essentially, and be the financial partner of choice for any military affiliated person looking to take down deals. We love our community very much. We've done $47 million in deals, 234 loans, 90 people that we've lent money to, a lot of repeat borrowers. We've helped create like $10 million in wealth. If you subtract the loan amount from the exit sales price or the appraisal for the refinance, that number alone is about 10 million in wealth that we've created for our guys. So we just want to be a better lender and a better platform for our military affiliate community so they can build wealth and they can do better things for the country in the future. And the other thing we're doing is, we lend, but we also do preferred equity too. So there's some situations where like we don't want to be the lender, or you don't need a lender, you found cheaper debt, but you need equity. We'll be that equity partner. And we've actually funded several $1 million in equity investments for mostly multifamily. But we'll be the equity partner if it makes sense. And you want to
Nice.
take us on as a partner.
Awesome. I didn't realize that. I may be reaching out to you. I've got a bunch of land that I live on here, and we're going to be developing into a short-term rental, some sort of, we haven't decided on the actual structure yet, because it can work so well with so many different, there's everything from tree houses to yurts to canvas tents to A-frames to cabins to tiny houses. All of those models work so well. We've just got a giant hayfield, surrounded by trees, and then there's a river that runs through the corner of it. It's got great fishing in it, so it's like set up perfect for this model. But we just have to decide on which structure we're going to go with. And so I think we'll probably end up using some equity partners to do that build. So I may be reaching out to you personally for that.
That's a great idea. We actually funded a guy in Colorado who bought several acres and is putting tiny homes onto it.
Really?
For Airbnb.
Nice.
Because he's not subject to any of because the land, it's kind of far out there. He's not subject to any of the city or county restrictions on Airbnb and short-term rentals. And as long as I think he's working on getting a sewer line out there.
Nice.
But outside of that, I think it's an excellent way, especially if you can kind of build like a bespoke or very cool community or really scenic community out of it.
Yeah. The cash flow can be phenomenal. I mean, I've looked at a few models where it's just, it's hard to believe the numbers. They're eye-popping. So yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, I appreciate it. So if somebody's listening to this and they are interested in working with you or applying for a loan, what's the best way to go about that?
So our website, trophypointinvestment.com, there's no S, but trophypointinvestment.com is a great place to start. Our application takes less than 5 minutes. Usually we can underwrite and provide term sheet within 48 hours from that 5-minute application. But then I'm always available too. There's a time to schedule. There's a spot on the website to schedule via Calendly a time for us to chat as well if you wanted to get to know me better or you wanted to run something by us. And then my email, Samir@trophypointinvestment.com. I'm always an email away as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's SAMIR for those who are listening. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So you can just, if you're listening to this and you want to go to the quick link, just go to the show notes and it'll be there. So awesome. Well, that's great. Thank you very much for spending the time today. I think this would be super beneficial for a lot of people in this community who are particularly in that BRRRR model, thinking about that BRRRR model strategy. This is just perfect setup for it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for allowing me to share.